Shri Krishna Sharanartham Pranamami. Hello, everybody. I found a little more time today. So this is part two of a little bit of a subject that I started opening up. Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. The Purusharthas, the four things that we're all responsible to in life that we have to deal with. And the four things that pretty much make up life or existence. And it's, of course, a model for thinking about that thing. So last time we talked about defining, basically, just in a structural way, what is dharma, what is artha, what is kama, and what is moksha, and kind of their interrelationship, both in a structural way and then also in an active way. So structure, right, leads to behavior. So by just understanding things in a sort of removed analytical way, we can kind of arrive at a simple conclusion because we're not applying it to something in life we're emotional about. So having done that, those of you who have seen the previous video I did, which is like 20 minutes, simple explanation, now we can start kind of applying it a little bit more. So we talked about how dharma, right, applies to everything that an object or a person, an entity, you can say any type of entity, person or a thing, animate or inanimate, and either the jiva or the supreme absolute entity, Sri Krishna, right, should be. So how should a person be? How should an object be? And therefore what is right and wrong and good and bad, right, for an entity. So dharma, right, talks a lot about that. And, even one of the meanings of dharma, dhara, right, dharana, the holder, right, to hold, to support, right, and uphold, right, hold up, right, as opposed to hold down, uphold, uplift. So these are some of the meanings of dharma. So what should a person be like? How should we behave? A lot of times we're all raised up with some type of notion about what's good and bad and right and wrong. And certainly these days, with a lot of information flowing around us through, devices and many forms of media, many people around us, along with those devices, are constantly, right, a source of suggestions on what we should do, how we should be, what's right and wrong and good and bad. So how to discern what's really real, what's really right and good and bad. We start from a very simple place, and this isn't something that, sorry, I'm just gonna see if I can play a little nice music. Yeah, good, a little music, set a little mood. It says, lately I've been listening to Indian classical guitar for this last year. We enjoyed it. Otherwise known as veena, right? The lute or stringed instrument tuned to the Saptaswaras, the seven, right, modes of melody. Veena. So anyways, first thing we have to do is define the self, the identity of the entity we're talking about. Identity, ID entity. So who is that entity? And then we can discern what is right and wrong and good and bad for that particular entity. So there's going to be three levels. So we talked about four things, right? Dharma, artha, kama, and moksha in this, right, cycle of development. And also in this structural way of looking at a thing, to know a thing, right? But now there's three levels to these four things, right? At which they're considered. So dharma, right, what is right and wrong, good or bad for a thing, will now be considered on three levels. So the most primary level, of course, is the most important to start with, just like however a water, like a river, right, or body of water, is upstream when it's flowing, right? That will determine everything that's going to happen downstream in that flow. So therefore, who we are as a person primarily, eternally, unchangingly, right, should be known and considered first. Not should, even should be. To the degree we know that, to the degree we can consider application of ourself in a situation or any object in a situation. So what is self? I made a video before I started this part 1, part 2 idea, where I talked a little bit more extensively about self. And one term that's commonly used in Sanskriti, right, that means Sanskrit culture, is Atma. Atma means self on any level, selfness, right? Right, Atmana, right, is composed of, we call it Brahma, absolute non-dual entity, right? And that doesn't mean impersonal. There is an absolute entity, an absolute person, of which our Atma, our selfhood, is a part, right? Called the Amsha, a part. And so if there's a person, an absolute person, an overall entity, and there's, right, part entities, that means there's an absolute relationship. In other words, an unending relationship that is never destabilized by any changes that relationship may go through. There's the relationship itself exists in an unchanging way. And even how the relationship will develop over time, right, is all part of the eternal intrinsic character of that relationship, right, that is on that level of pure selfhood. Right, these are very deep concepts and thoughts, and what that means is that the level of material we're talking about has a lot of implications. Implications meaning what we can see on this level will necessarily transform the way we see everything else. So there's a lot of impact that actually giving these ideas some actual time to consider and look through, to examine and get experience by looking through these perspectives. And that's the whole point, actually. And we call this satsanga, or time spent with each other, or just even time spent for sat, for truth, and not just to think about it or talk about it, or right, philosophize about it, or examine logic. But those things are nice in so much as they can bring us experience that then, right, fortifies and nourishes and matures the Atma, the self, our self. So then dharma, the more I have experience and have mature experience of myself and my Atma, then I have a more concrete and mature perspective on dharma, what I should do, what's right and wrong for me to do, and others as well, because we all share selfhood, right? So the same quality and nature of the self is shared with me and with everybody else. So this is the first level of, we talk about 3 levels of dharma, of everything, right? So the first level is that personal, spiritual, absolute, eternal level of selfhood that would then determine a level of right and wrong, good or bad, that is unchanging, absolute, you could say divine, sacred, and that then determines, right, it draws a context within which the next levels will develop. So if, for instance, we can say the self is eternal. If the self has an eternal personal relationship in individuation, right, in relationship to an absolute person or divine, that defines the relationships between me and the other Amsha parts of that absolute person, who are also absolute people, They're not absolute people, but parts of that absolute person. Right? Then there's right or wrong or good or bad in terms of those relationships. And to the degree I have experience of that, so I take time, right? I use these thoughts to examine the direct experience I have of myself. Right? These thoughts can meet somebody and say, okay, now let me see what that experience is. Then I can determine what is going to be beneficial and what is going to be detrimental for that level of myself. Now, then immediately, the next step will be the circumstance that I'm in, right, will have to be brought into consideration. Okay, I'm currently in this form of a male American, named Bhima Karma, right, who was born to these, parents who were part of this Hare Krishna ISKCON, sort of Vaishnava splinter off group, and so on and so on. I have this whole life story. And this is like a role I've been given inside of a drama. I didn't manufacture this role, simply I was put into this position. I don't necessarily know exactly how that goes on. But here I find myself, my Atma, in this situation, this circumstance that has all these dramatic elements and dynamics working. So now the responsibility I have is to the degree I know my Atma, right, then I can now think about many people recommend negate the role and say, oh, this is illusion. The only real reality is myself, and all of this is actually not myself. I'm not Bhima Karma. I'm not a male. I'm not white. I'm not American. I'm not, I'm not anything of that. I'm not qualifiable, right? Because experience is absolute and one. And immediately you can see this gets very abstract and impersonal and even nihilistic in the end. Right? Not very ananda-ish, very happy, which is part of the nature of the self. Adharmic. So what is dharmic is to engage with the role, right, that we have in such a way that it nourishes the self, that it nourishes the personal relationships, right, in such a way that it nourishes our absolute relationship with the absolute person. So, just to recap again, because this is like really rich material, I'm recapping for myself that, right, first establish the nature of the self. Just, I recommend for those of you who are new to this type of thinking, Bhagavad Gita is a very good way to start. So all of the Vedic literatures, Sanskrit literatures, amazing, very well developed systematic thought in these areas, a non-religious, non-sectarian, scientific way of simply analyzing the subject matter. By inspection of reality, we can see the self is like this, the world is like this, and so on and so on. So, but all of that type of information that you would find in many called Upanishads and many other texts are condensed inside of what's called Gita Upanishad or Bhagavad Gita. And in Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna is speaking, right? And he kind of walks through a lot of these things, right? So you can, for some food for thought to think about the nature of self. You can go into the, second chapter of that, for instance, where there's like a nice long conversation talking about the nature of self looked at from many perspectives. Right? First, eternality is considered. Then, the nature of the self as being a balancer of opposites is considered. Many things like that. And these are great because they can get us more experience of the self. And this is great because experience of the self means I can now relate to the absolute self. Right? So, traditions called God, traditions called Bhagavan, right? The supreme entity, modern scientists will, let's say, like singularity, but right, these are things we all have to deal with. You can call it what you want, you can relate to it how you want, but it's there to be dealt with. It's part of reality. The absolute person is there for us to relate to it as part of our reality. So these kind of concepts can be food for thought to build our sense of self. And from there, we'll start to know what's wrong, right, good and bad for ourselves in this circumstance. So if I'm a white male at this time and in this, world, whatever you call it, this world, this American, history where all these things are going on, now we have a very interesting thing to think about and consider and talk about. Like, okay, here's the situation. It's a rich situation, and here I am with my, spiritual desires and needs and wants and, shoulds and supposed tos and goods and bads. How do I interact? How do I face this? Now there's something to figure out, right? That's very interesting to figure out. That's not a should or a supposed to that's imposed on us, but one that's being inspired out of us, out of direct perception of the self and of the desires, the nature that inheres in the self. So then Dharma, the stage for the drama, the play of Dharma, the soul's Dharma, the self's nature to start developing, exploring, and growing and maturing can now begin. So I think I'll just cut it there for now. Those of you who know me know I can talk on and on, so we'll cut it there for now and do another one next time. So, Shri Krishna Sharanatha. Jai Shri Krishna, Pranamami. See you guys soon.